Let's get into the climate hat trick for this week. 3 stories, big news stories in the world of sport, viewed through the lens of climate and sustainability. So one thing when I was looking at the news this week, and the first story is kind of not just one story, but a few stories wrapped in together under the banner of investors and broadcasters continue to pile into women's sport. Another reminder this week that women's sport is absolutely booming and the numbers continue to be impossible to ignore. So across global football, for example, or soccer, the momentum continues to build apace. Mary Fowler signed a $10 million deal for Adidas, one of the biggest in women's football history. Meanwhile, the San Diego Wave inked US women's national team star Katerina Macario in a record NWSL deal. She's going to earn about $8 million over 5 seasons. This weekend, Denver's new NWSL team set the national benchmark for club soccer. They got a league attendance record of over 63,000 fans going to the game, and that also made it a record for attendance of a standalone women's soccer game in the US to date as well. So lots happening in the US around soccer football, but this goes beyond talent as well. So broadcasters and media companies are building now dedicated women's sport portfolios beyond just one-off events. This week, Sky Sports signed a multi-year deal with influencer Jake Paul's Most Valuable Promotions organisation to broadcast boxing events in the UK, including a regular all-female fight cards. Earlier this month, the PWHL, which is the Professional Women's Hockey League, chose Scripps Sports to broadcast the game on ION in a one-time deal that could potentially turn into a long-time partnership. So their president, the president of Scripps Sports, Brian Lawler, said, "Proven itself out, which is why it makes sense to keep doubling down." What he was referencing was that Scripps, the organisation that owns ION, which is a network reaching 126 million US households, had previously acquired rights to the WNBA and the NWSL, and now it has added in the PWHL to its portfolio as well. This, of course, is an ongoing signal that women's sport is central to growth strategies. Women's sport, we know, has been historically undervalued compared to men's leagues, but is now seen as high growth, high potential, and recognised as an asset class for investors. A couple of days still in US sports, it was announced that the NFL is developing a new professional flag football league for both women and men. Flag football, what we would call here in the UK American football, what in the US is just called football, with a broad and influential investor pool. So that includes NFL clubs, established institutional and strategic investors, and current and former NFL players. So to reiterate, they are developing this league for both women and men in concert. Arthur Blank, who acquired the Atlanta NWSL franchise for $165 million at the end of last year, was back in the news this week after announcing their new president of soccer across the Atlanta team. So again, he was talking at the Sport Business Journal conference about the focus on finance in the growth of women's sport and looking at bottom line. So a lot of women's sports news this week around investment, around broadcast, around talent, and around reach. The continued meteoric growth of women's sport offers brands and investors the opportunity to reach new audiences, access new revenue streams, and secure high returns. But of course, this is the Climate of Sport podcast. So the reason I'm talking about it is because it benefits society and the planet as well. Research shows that women's sports fans are more likely to have a values-first mindset and prioritize brands that demonstrate integrity and social responsibility. So in the environmental space, we can see that female athletes are more likely to use their platforms to advocate for causes they care about. So as their platform grows, as investment continues, as it becomes more mainstream, so does the reach of the messaging, and that can only be a good thing for the environment and our society. As a reminder, with record-breaking viewership, expanding sponsorship investment, and this fan base driven by values, women's sports presents the chance for brands to align with purpose-driven engagement. And investors and sponsors who recognise this are not only securing financial returns, but also contributing to a more inclusive, responsible and sustainable sports ecosystem. Story 2, what connects flooding, felons, sinkholes and shortened distances? It's the Brazilian MotoGP. The MotoGP in Brazil returned to the Autodromo Internacional Ayrton Senna for the first time since 1989, but was overshadowed by a weekend marked by flooding, structural failure, and deteriorating race conditions, unfortunately. Heavy rain in the days leading up to the event left a section of the circuit waterlogged, with mud repeatedly washing onto the track. Whilst March does fall just in the tail end of Brazil's body, highlighted unprecedented rainfall as a reason for these track issues. Crews struggled to manage the situation. Local authorities even deployed prison inmates to assist with clearing debris, highlighting the scale of the challenge and the resources available to put this right. The situation escalated during the competition when a sinkhole began to form along the main straight, one of the fastest section of the track, forcing a 90-minute delay to one of the sprint races. And the incident pointed to a deeper structural issue beneath the track surface, likely worsened by water infiltration. So basically, there was a defunct sewer system underneath the track, and that led to a weak point that was probably worsened by the incredibly heavy rainfall and flooding that had taken place. Conditions continue to deteriorate, with visible damage to the asphalt appearing along the racing line, and riders and loose fragments of the track surface were being thrown up. Riders actually came into the post-race debriefs with broken front. Among those affected was reigning world champion Marc Marquez, who lost a podium position after encountering a crumbling section of track in the closing laps. Safety concerns forced organisers to take emergency measures, and the race was actually revised. So lap race was reduced to 23 to reduce the risk to riders. So again, it's the climate of sport. What are we talking about here? It's in the rainy season in Brazil. It's a reminder that unprecedented levels of rain or unprecedented climate impacts, even within the expected weather conditions, can overwhelm infrastructure. In this case, probably short, intense rainfall bursts that were still in the rainy season, but cascaded into risks such as from flooding to subsurface failure to surface collapse. MotoGP is expanding into new and returning venues worldwide, so the rainfall in Goiânia may serve as a warning. It's not just about weather extremes, but whether the infrastructure is prepared to handle them. And what I wanted to highlight here is perhaps this isn't a direct climate impact in terms of it being attributed to climate change directly, because it was the rainy season in Brazil, so we could expect rain to fall, nothing unusual about that. But the fact the governing body pointed to unprecedented levels of rain, it shows that even when the climate predictably does what you expect it to, a combination of worsening levels is enough to expose weaknesses really quickly and really publicly. So a reminder that these are areas, even when the weather is what we expect, it can still be extreme and therefore cause impacts. Story 3, climate crashes the race. Protesters halt pro cycling. So the organisers of the 2026 Ronde van Brugge have launched legal action against a climate protester who disrupted the men's race. The activist appeared in the course around 30 kilometres from the finish line, wearing a helmet and t-shirt reading, "Kids dying by the climate crisis in 3, 2, 1. Breaking free from the crowd, he sat on the road as the densely packed peloton approached. Outrider motorbikes acted quickly, forcing the Belgian activist, whose name is Wout de Mouton, off the course, but the sudden braking caused a pile-up, and it took down last year's winner, Juan Sebastian Molano. This ended the UAE Team Emirates XRG's riders' race and caused him injury as well. Mouton has a history of high-profile activism, including a short prison term for gluing his head to vermeer that poured tomato passata over him. This was the first incident of its kind this season, but we know, and organisers, teams, riders and fans know, it probably won't be the last. In 2025, all 3 men's Grand Tours faced a disruption from on-course demonstrations. Protesters have been a regular occurrence in pro cycling. Climate protesters accounted for a number of notable disruptions to races. In 2022, at the Tour de France, climate activists had to be dragged off the course by policemen and even race officials, and protesters glued themselves to the road at the 2023 UCI Road World Championships. A trend that people within our society increasingly expect high-profile institutions like sports organisations to take climate action seriously. Professional sport draws massive global audiences, so that is why it is targeted when activists choose elite areas, elite platforms, elite events to protest, have become in our public discourse. So again, this story, the reason for its inclusion this week is whether through protest or extreme weather, sport is continually being forced to reckon with climate disruption, impacting safety, scheduling, infrastructure, and even the fan experience. Pro Cycling Europe frequently has to deal with extreme weather and climate impacts. So in the past, we've seen extreme heat, landslides, flooding, high-speed wind. But this is an example that even when the weather plays ball, even when you don't have an extreme weather event to deal with and react to, the impacts of the climate crisis are still showing up, in this case through protesters and causing disruption. This, to me, proves that sport can never be separated from the world it plays in. So our three stories this week in the climate hat trick. 1, investors and broadcasters are piling in to women's sport. 2, what connects flooding, felons, sinkholes, and shortened distances, the Brazilian MotoGP. And 3, the climate crashes the race, protest, Halts pro cycling. Thank you for joining us.